Welcome, everyone. I'm William Bloom, and this is the first in a new series of Compassion Dialogues, hosted by the Spiritual Companions Trust and the UK Register of Spiritual Caregivers. We develop resources for people who are spiritual, but not necessarily religious. In all these dialogues, our purpose is to explore what influences, motivates, and inspires influential spiritual authors, teachers, and activists, and hopefully inspire you too. More love, more compassion, more consciousness. Coming up in a couple of weeks, I'll be talking with internationally famous author, scientist, and mystic Rupert Sheldrake about the morphic field, God's consciousness, and telepathic animals. Don't miss it. But today, with a huge welcome, I'm talking with Terry Gilbey, who is CEO of the Findhorn Foundation. Findhorn was hugely influential in my own development. I love the place. Terry was brought in when the foundation was already in decline. COVID had ravaged income from residential courses, and then a terrible fire destroyed key buildings, including the sanctuary. Terry had previously been CEO of the Esalen Institute, and you probably know it's a hugely influential center in California in the human potential and modern spirituality movement, and helped Esalen as well recover from what was a dire situation. Before that, for a short time, Terry was Chief Operating Officer of Wikimedia. That really impresses me, Terry. And before that, a very senior executive and consultant in organizations, including IBM and Kaiser Permanente, which has over 300,000 employees. So Terry is very experienced. But in taking on the role at Findhorn, was he given a wonderful opportunity or handed a poisoned chalice? We're going to talk with Terry about who he is and his background first before we get to Findhorn. So, Terry, welcome. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. So before we talk about Wikimedia, Esalen, Findhorn, we'd all love to find out a little bit more about you as a person, your childhood,
You bet.
where you were born, what your parents were, what you were like at school. Were you a ruffian? Were you a sweet kid? What was going on for you? Tell us about your childhood.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, first of all. I'm thrilled to be here in the kind of in the same list as Mr. Sheldrake. That's quite an honor. So thanks for having me. Let's see. Well, I was born and raised in England. I was actually born in Portsmouth, way down in the south, and grew up kind of just outside on the edge of the Cotswolds. I don't really know how to describe my childhood. I was extremely fortunate that I was exposed to just an incredibly broad spectrum of things. I was a curious child, apparently, I'm told. I would always be found taking things apart. I'm not sure I managed to put them all back together, but I was always found taking things apart. Not a particularly successful student at school, frankly. I think I left school at 15 and a half, something like that, quite young, and went out into the world, really, to experience life and everything.
So if you
Had a good upbringing.
go
ahead.
So if you left school at 15 and a half, 16, that kind of hints at not having hoity-toity middle-class parents, or were you a bit of a
No,
renegade?
I actually came from a really good. I had a very privileged upbringing in many respects, but I was just not a good student. Didn't do well in the classroom, and so just school was not my thing. University was not my thing. It was much more a world of practical learning for me than it was of studying the books. Although I love books now, ironically. I grew up essentially dyslexic, extremely dyslexic. I was considered kind of illiterate by school standards, and in my early years at school, and had extensive tutoring to learn to read and write. But yeah, so no, I certainly had a lot of opportunity coming out of my childhood, and just chose to find the experience in the world, really, to travel, to explore.
So let me come in there
Yeah.
just for a minute, because I have a lot to do with special needs children and children with different learning styles. And quite often, in parallel with the neurodiversity, the different learning style, is a kind of disrespect that can happen, which is psychologically damaging for the child, quite separate from the actual learning style. And I'm curious, were you treated okay with your dyslexia? Because it's prior to the much more empathic understanding we have of neurodiversity nowadays. Were you treated okay at school?
Yeah, I actually think I had a really good upbringing. I have zero complaints or kind of negative hangover from any of my childhood. I actually kind of joke with my wife. She's like, "Oh, that sounds like such a terrible upbringing." I'm like, "It was wonderful. I had a great opportunity. I got to explore things that some of my peers weren't, because they were great students, and so they had their nose in the book. Where I was out kind of tinkering, taking things apart, putting things back together, trying to figure out how life, the universe, and everything kind of worked for me. So yeah. It's been an interesting journey. I still am. I still struggle with dyslexia. So people who receive emails from me, they need kind of a decoder ring sometimes, because I'll write my stream of consciousness, and of course, when I reread it, I'm recalling what I wrote, not necessarily what I see in front of me. So it's kind of already a joke around here. It's like, oh, that's one of Terry's emails.
So you left school and you went to work, or you went traveling?
A little bit of both. Had a kind of a roam around the world moment. Had lots of different odds and ends. I was determined not to be unemployed. So at one point, I worked in a zoo, kept a reptile house in a zoo. It was one of those things where Dudley. In Dudley, in the West Midlands, yeah, and and was scraping elephant dung off the concrete, taking care of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, done everything from literally kind of the brown and smelly stuff to cooking. Love to cook. If I figured I could make any money at that when I was a young man, I probably would have taken that as a profession and a road. All the way up to computer programming. I cut my teeth very early in the days when computers were just wee things, and yeah, so that's kind of how I spent my formative years.
Let me try and organize this a little bit.
You bet.
Because I've now got this picture of this 16-year-old leaving school. You like cooking, you like mechanics, doing things with your hands, you're working in a zoo, and now you've suddenly brought in that you understand the way computer hardware, software works. So how did you discover that?
Yeah, so I was a really early adopter of the computer world. So in a pure techno speak, this is back in the days of Motorola 6800 chips, when you had 8 LEDs and 8 switches. And I think I was probably, I don't know, 12 or 13 and maybe 14 when I built my first computer at home, and soldering iron and all of the kind of stuff that you do. And one thing led to another. As I said, I've always loved to figure out how things work. Ended up kind kind of exploring computers, became a computer programmer, became a systems programmer. In those days, there were.
So how old were you then?
Oh, I was edging into my 20s at that point.
Okay, so late teens, early 20s, you're learning Fortran or one of the advanced codes?
Back in the days, that was machine code. I mean, we were
Okay.
programming in zeros and ones at that point.
Okay.
And then into what IBM would consider to be assembler language, very, very rudimentary stuff. Moved on into COBOL, Fortran, Pascal. Those were the languages of the day. Very unsophisticated by today's standards, but much closer to the hardware. I was a computer operator. I did kind of worked my way up pretty quickly through the echelons.
Let me pause you because I'm actually fascinated, right? So there you are. You've got dyslexia, but the logic of coding suits your brain.
Yeah, I can see the flow. Yeah, I can see the flow.
You can see the flow, and because there's an extraordinary, rigorous logic to the flow in computer programming and coding.
Yeah, but I could almost see code. Versus it actually didn't get impacted by my dyslexia to any great extent at all. So I could write code pretty easily.
Yeah, but see, I could write novels pretty easily, but I was with my sister when she learned Fortran, and I could not understand code. I could not see it. Right? There's definitely a really interesting piece of neurodiversity here and I freak out if I look at an Excel sheet, for example.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I love them.
Yeah. Look.
Yeah. So that was kind of my how I got introduced to computers. I mean, this is back in the days where they had, big tape drives and punch cards and that kind of stuff. Worked through that. And one thing led to another. And the next thing I knew, I was in the technology world. And it's a question of being in the right place at the right time, I think, is the way that I've kind of grown up. Very fortunate, very blessed in that respect. And then one job led to another, and I would just kind of get pulled into the next job, which has been an interesting journey on reflection. I've definitely been pulled into things versus kind of having a defined plan and seeking them out.
Okay, so here's a question coming from a different angle. As a kid, and then going into the coding digital world, did you have any kind of a spiritual bent or an instinct for compassion and that kind of stuff? What was going on inside you at that level?
Yeah, I grew up Church of England. I was baptized into the Church of England and kind of had my formative years there. Took a little dalliance over to the Methodists because they had a ping pong table, which was great, Wednesday evening club. And then really kind of stepped away from organized religion and began to explore some of the Eastern religions more so. They resonated with me to a much greater extent. And that's kind of been my path, which is pulling together. I like the term spiritual, but not religious. A friend of mine back in the US, Jeff Kripal, who's a professor down in Texas, has worked a lot with that concept. And I would definitely put myself in that realm of spiritual, but not religious. Had a bit of a falling out with the structures and the ways, you either comply or you're not in the in group, and as kind of a little bit of a rebel and somebody that questions many things, I didn't necessarily fit in well all the time.
Well, join the club. I imagine nearly everybody listening is of a similar club. It's almost wave your hands, everybody, if that's a familiar story. So again, I'm coming back to, I'm threading into this kind of mainstream career, CFE, then kind of coming out of CV, having an awareness of Eastern religions. Does that mean you were practicing anything, or was you just kind of hearing about it or sitting in groups? Because you don't like reading, so you wouldn't necessarily have been reading.
No, so I had an opportunity to have a fair exposure into the Buddhist world, but then work and everything caught up with me. I kind of got disconnected from that. But I would say probably for 3 or 4 years, I was pretty well practicing Buddhist in many respects. And then stepped away, started to look at some of the more esoteric Indian religions, more from a curiosity perspective, really, asking that question of, well, how does all this work? Which is something I come back to a lot. Why does this happen? Why do we put value into these things? Why are we connected to them? What is the meaning of them? And then I took a few years off completely. Ended up many years later back in the US, or in the US. I was a corporate transplant over there, and got connected with the Episcopal Church there. Ended up teaching Sunday school in a pretty large Episcopal church in Memphis, Tennessee, and really enjoyed the pastor there, the vicar, as we would call in England. In fact, Doug and I would joke, he was a great theologian. We would joke that he was the best heretic I knew. And it was wonderful because his faith was so deep, he could actually make fun of it and be very deeply curious about it, and challenge it at every turn. And so he and I had a pretty good relationship and conversation around topics there.
Let me put a question.
After that, yeah, go ahead.
So what I'm curious about, I'm always curious about this, is the interest in Christianity, then Buddhism, then esoteric Hinduism or Taoist stuff, or whatever it was you got into. Was this going on in your mind as a kind of thought process, or were you having experiences that were either heart-opening or felt? How would you describe what was going on for you as you were exploring these worlds?
Yeah, I actually think that my transition between these was more about a heart closing and a disillusionment, actually, which was what pushed me away. I wasn't finding answers to my questions, or the answers I was finding just weren't making sense to me. The dissonance between the rhetoric and the reality, the not walking the talk. I would struggle with that, and then I would look for something else. So there was definitely a yearning to find that which spoke to me.
So here's the slightly intrusive question.
Yeah.
But it's, were you having a personal experience of God, the divine, the Tao, was quite aside from the inquiry and the organizations? Did you have a personal experience of the inner worlds?
Yes, but I wasn't finding something that I could relate to fully in the religious side, and I think that was the part of the problem. It wasn't the frameworks weren't connecting with my experience.
All right, so this is what I'm trying to be slightly intrusive on, because I know this is of huge interest to folk like us. What was your experience, Terry? What was going on for you, so that you would know that the dogma and the structure and the organizations were not congruent?
I would. That was my challenge. I would have experiences, and those experiences, when I sought reference in the framework of the religion that I was involved in at the time, it fell apart for me. And that was my challenge with religion. I think to some extent still is, is that when I tried to find a framework that I could translate my experiences through, it just wasn't there.
But I mean, the great mystics of all traditions say it's a mystery.
But
But the experience is kind of beautiful and weird. And
yeah.
So you were having an experience that was kind of beautiful and weird, and you wanted it unpacked in a way that was coherent, because you like models.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I like to pull things apart and try to understand them at a more granular level of detail, which is kind of a little bit of a paradox when you think about it in terms of a spiritual experience. But that's the one side of my brain versus the other side of my brain, and how that competition goes on.
Great. So
that space.
I think I'm getting to understand you now. There's this spectrum between, geez, I'm having an experience, yay. And over here, you've got this almost genius type model builder, who wants to put it all together. Mm-hmm. And the mystery, it's a mystery, man.
Well, I think that's the lasting lesson that keeps coming back. It doesn't stop my curiosity, but it doesn't have to make sense. But there's this driving force behind me which goes, well, let me see if I can just find a framework that I can kind of make sense of this in some way, shape, or form.
Sure, that's the journey, isn't it? But at a certain point, I think we realize human consciousness is simply not sufficiently developed to be able to categorize it effectively. And there's the various levels that you can absolutely map, but at a certain point, it's we're just, the more we know, the less we know.
Exactly. The more we seek it, the further away it is.
All right. So parking all that just for the moment.
Yeah.
You had what from the outside looks like a really successful career in mainstream world.
Yeah.
I mean, and so you, in that mainstream career, presumably, I'm making an assumption now, which you can push back on, the bits and pieces that needed ordering in a way that worked became human beings, not just the bits and pieces of a coding program.
Yeah, there was definitely that involved. There was also just the systems of culture and the systems of organizations that I also got fascinated with. It's how do you bring very disparate people together to get things done? How do you take a group of people who are convinced that something is not achievable and help them understand that they've got everything they need? They just have to try. And so, a lot of what I've done in prior years, kind of in the business world, is actually I joke, I think sometimes I'm just too dumb to realize it can't be done. So you try it anyway, and finding a way to convince or encourage people to kind of step off the lily pad, so to speak, and jump in and try something. Yeah, that's part of the fascination for me.
So I don't know whether you can share this or not, and we'll move on to Esalen in a minute. But before we do, these huge organizations you worked for at a very senior level, have you got one good story about a change process you either screwed up or was very successful?
Let's see. Well, I've got more of a funny story about getting taught a very good lesson once. I was architecting a deal for a pretty large outsourcing, and we'd made a pretty big error on the costing model. And I went into my boss and said, I own this. It was my mistake. We didn't get it right. It cost a lot of money.
Give us a figure.
Well beyond six figures.
Okay.
And more into the seven figures kind of range. And I said, you can have my resignation. And it was actually a really, really great moment, because he said, if you think I'm going to let you resign when I've just invested that much money in your education, you're a fool. You're going to be here for a little while, and you're going to make that back. But so that was one of the moments. That was a really good learning for me around the power of mistakes, and actually working for somebody who appreciated the value that could come from a mistake. I think it was the genesis of my kind of wisdom formula that I've been working on. So yeah.
Generous boss.
Very.
Or shrewd boss.
Actually, a very, very smart person.
Yeah. So look, and this is relevant to fast forwarding to Findhorn, which we will come to, right? You were for a period of time Chief Operating Officer at Wikimedia.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put to the side the fact that there were all kinds of, nothing to do with you, all kinds of shenanigans going on around the finances there and organizational stuff. But what's really interesting, and I absolutely think relevant to a conversation about the future of Findhorn, the future of spirituality, the future of centers that are geographically located, is your insights and experience from Wikimedia, where, as a researcher and an author, a novelist and academic, I am so deeply grateful to Wikimedia for the research it does for me, or the conglomerate of all the various teams and people managed to put together. So presumably, this is me idealizing your experience. Presumably, going into Wikimedia for a while was like incarnating into a global brain energy field. So you, as Chief Operations Officer, you have a tangible, embodied, incarnate experience of, whoa, planet, information. And it is a fact. It's not a nebulous romantic idea. This is it in action. Here are the networks. Am I idealizing what happened for you, the silver lining to the experience?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I mean, it's an amazing organization. Jimmy Wales created something absolutely, I think, probably as impactful, we could say, even as the typewriter to the world. It's an amazing organization that is 100% funded from small donations, or at least it was when I was there. We used to, put the banner up that said, "For the price of a cup of coffee," and that brought in millions and millions of dollars. I think for me, it was a recognition how much difference in the world access to information and knowledge brings to people, right? It is definitely a major catalyst for people to grow, both as individuals and in their relative position in the world. It's an enabler. And so, how you can get that kind of knowledge out to the middle of the African desert, how you can get that knowledge to somebody in a high rise, it makes a huge, huge difference to quality of life, to their own growth curve, all of those kind of things. So the concept is amazing. And the fact that it's publicly sourced information, right? These are all volunteers. We want to talk about a global community. My goodness, these are people who commit thousands of hours to just public good of creating well-referenced, well-indexed information. So yeah.
But the bit I'm and I'm one of the people who's donated money regularly, just to say.
Thank you.
But the bit that I'm interested in is if you take a localized spiritual center, which for like thousands of years, if somebody wanted to be part of a spiritual center, you needed to travel.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted wisdom, you needed to make a journey.
Yeah.
And if you wanted wisdom that was beyond the religious culture in which you were born, you needed to journey quite a distance. And that was dangerous and difficult. And when Findhorn and Esalen were founded, and all the monasteries and convents and abbeys the world over were founded, they were places to which people would make a pilgrimage, would travel to, because they were a resource of knowledge. I live in Glastonbury, which had the greatest library in Europe at one point, and people would travel here for learning. With Wikimedia is the paradigm of it. With Wikimedia, you have this solid example of you don't need to travel anymore. And that changes the game. Plus, if from a mystic point of view, everybody is also connected prayerfully or meditatively in some kind of mysterious Buddha Christ consciousness energy field, that's a mystery for us, right? There's actually less, the need for located geographical centers becomes very different.
Hmm.
Now with Esalen is its resourced, its USPs are quite startling in so much as it's got beautiful hot springs, extraordinary cliffs and views across the Pacific, plus it's in driving distance of LA and San Francisco, which is filled with people who've taken mushrooms and psychedelics and are in therapy,
mm-hmm.
doing yoga, and there's just a huge arena from which it can be resourced and supported. Findhorn doesn't have that. You know, Aberdeen, Inverness, Edinburgh, London, it's not in that hub between LA and San Francisco. It doesn't have the hot springs. Right? So what I'm going to take the conversation towards in a few minutes is what can be the offer of a place like Findhorn in the future? Or is it going to go the route of many abbeys and convents and retreat houses, which have just slowly diminished? They've served a huge and wonderful purpose, right? But before we go there, I know that you went through a phase of, I've had enough of work, I've had enough of this kind of ambition, this kind of money-centered status thing. And you went to Esalen and you worked in the kitchen for a month.
I did.
Yeah, which you loved.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of pivoted your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they kind of, they must have gone, hello, who have we got here? Terry, can you help us out? What was it like helping Esalen shift?
It was a great experience. You know, we showed up at Esalen actually for a work scholar month, which was the program where you would get a couple of hours education a night, 5 nights a week. You were there for about 4 weeks. And as part of supplementing tuition and that kind of thing, you would work in a department. And I ended up in my first rotation through the work scholar program, as it was classed then, working in the kitchen. And that was a great place for me. I was washing dishes and cutting vegetables and just having a great time, juxtaposed against, you know, a prior corporate life. So I was in my element. It was a different pace, but it was very easy, comfortable work for me. I joke with people that I'm kind of a failure as a serial retiree. I've retired probably 4 or 5 times now and always end up back doing something. So we had returned to Esalen for a second month because we'd originally wanted to take a month of Gestalt psychology. My wife and I, Kim. So we were there together doing this Gestalt psychology month. They were looking for somebody to help in a bigger way in the kitchen. So one thing led to another. I was there while the massive landslides took place, which literally turned Esalen and a good portion of the Big Sur coast into an island. Ended up having to helicopter everybody out. They were at a place where there was a really big inflection point from a financial perspective. They were not doing well financially. The business model was kind of broken. And so I got involved in revamping the business model while we were there. I ended up with, there was about 20 of us there during the closure. They'd helicoptered everybody out. We were just kind of trying to keep the place going and alive. We rebuilt the business model, reopened Esalen once the road reopened, and was pretty successful in both creating a better quality of experience for people when they came. They were able to drop in, have a richer transformational experience. And we were able to kind of correct some of the financial challenges that the organization was going through. So to bring those two things together, we actually reduced the number of people who were coming as participants, and we were actually able to make it financially viable. And so I went literally from, I think it was dishwasher to CEO in a period of months there. And it was a pretty gnarly period, but we were pretty successful in turning it around. And I'm happy to say that it's still very, very vibrant today.
I'm very tempted to ask you what the gnarliness was like, because I would be guessing that it's something to do with people who've been there for a while, who wanted to hang on to stuff, resisting an unfoldment into a new model or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it is cultural change. The business side of things is not that difficult, but cultural change is hard. You've got people who are very attached and comfortable to the way systems operated. And Esalen went through an interesting set of growths over the decades that it was there. It started very much as a come, do your work, have your experiences, and then take it out into the world. That was definitely what the founders had laid out as their goals, I think. Excuse me. After Dick Price passed away, it became much more of a community there, and people were now living there much longer term. Dick used to say, this is a greenhouse, not a garden. You shouldn't be putting down roots here. Your job is to come here, do your work, and then take it out into the world and move on. So, we had to work through a lot of cultural issues in that change. That was, the landslides closed the place. And that really helped us in a way. It was, don't let a good crisis go to waste, so to speak. It was a great opportunity to make some radical change, which we did. And I think, test of time, it was for the better. But yeah, it was a big cultural change for people.
So that, to a degree, will mirror the experience you're having at Findhorn now. So what I want to do before we talk about your role in Findhorn at the moment, I just want to lay out some background for folk who are listening who are not deeply embedded in Findhorn, or don't understand the legalities of a charity in the UK, including Scotland. So yes, Terry is the CEO of the Findhorn Foundation. which is a charity. And in British law, a charity is legally, the people responsible legally for the charity are the trustees. They are the bottom line. And the executive, in this case, Terry and a small team around him, are putting it in one way, they are the servants of the trustees. And legally, the trustees must keep to the aims and purposes as stated in the legal documents that created the entity, which is the charity. And they are there to ensure that the executive, in this case, Terry, stays aligned with the charitable purposes. At the same time, the trustees are obligated under charity law to look after the money and the resources of the charity in certain ways. They can't just be given away or played with. So at Findhorn, we've got the trustees, we've got the legal documents, we've got Terry and a small team as the executive, and then you've got the community living around it who are stakeholders in this particular game. But ultimately, it's the trustees who make decisions, and the trustees are the ones who pulled in Terry. And as Terry said to me earlier, he felt called in anyway. There was a calling to come and work at Findhorn, work with Findhorn. So he lands in a very influential spiritual, eco-spiritual community that has been ravaged by COVID, that had a terrible fire that burnt down many of its core buildings, including the sanctuary where everybody meditated. And there's also, Terry's also coming into a slightly confused, from my point of view, situation, because the original founders of Findhorn, Eileen, Dorothy, and Peter, were all of them deeply engaged in metaphysics, psychism, esoterics, mysticism. And then when David Spangler came and helped set up the educational program, he also was deeply involved in metaphysics, psychism, and mysticism. And the community, in a sense, became the vessel or the platform for the experiential learning to happen around metaphysics, psychism, mysticism. And it was appropriate that the community be ecological, be emotionally literate. But fast forward from the 60s into the 80s and 90s, and the whole world has changed because esoterics, mysticism, psychism has become a kind of global lifestyle, hugely vulgar. And in a sense, the folk running Findhorn were a bit shy of the psychism and the esoterics. And so here we are, 2023, and Terry is now in the middle of this circumstance, looking to see if there's a way forward, whether you can create, I imagine, to put it bluntly, looking to see whether you can create a business plan that will make the foundation, the charity, viable. Yeah. So how's it going?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good flyby there. You know, it is a question of how do we ensure that we are good stewards of all of these amazing things that we've been entrusted with, that people have built and the community's built over the last 60 years. I think so many of the organizations like Findhorn, Esalen, you know, there's organizations here in the UK that are struggling post-Brexit, post-COVID, all of these things that have really impacted the financial side. I think as you highlight, there's there's the whole spiritual side as well. And so, our job as it is today is how do we preserve the future? How do we build a new future of what was a rapidly evolving, unsustainable operating model? You've got to have enough to cover your bills. I talk about it as the charity pyramid, where at the top, starting at the bottom, you've got this economic stability that you have to have. It's kind of like Maslow's pyramid. You've got to build this sustainable, an operational basement for the organization to sit upon, because without that, you can't support a community. The community sits on top of that. And of course, without a community, it's very hard to take forward the vision and the mission and to actually have impact in the world to fulfill the charitable purpose. So getting that underpinning is right now a major priority, so that we do retain agency over this amazing thing that we have been given to steward into its next evolution. It's come through multiple evolutions. So that's what we're working on. We had to bring down the size of the organization very quickly. And as many might know, we ended our education offerings on September the 23rd. And we've now kind of gone into an operational pause while we return to that inner listening. And we create the quiet and we create the spaciousness to listen to what comes through. The big questions of who do we serve? Why Findhorn? Why now? How do we serve people? What is it that we bring to the world to meet the challenges of today? They're different challenges than they were in 60s and 70s and 80s. But I still believe we have the fundamental tool set that can support people in a day where we are facing so many crises every day, crises of economy, crises of social unrest, and most importantly, a spiritual crisis too. The amount of people that are moving away from spiritual purpose is continuing to grow. And I think that is a kind of a barometer of where we're headed as a society.
Let me get you off the hook on something. As a fairly close observer of the foundation over decades and the finances over the last few years, and having been involved in looking at various business models, it was, for me, inevitable that there would need to be a period of temporary closure because there wasn't enough income coming in to pay the wages, basically.
Yeah.
And you were handed the chalice of it had to happen under your watch. So I just want to clear the air and say, if anybody is blaming you for that, that's unfair. It's unfair.
Well,
it's been building from my point of view, for maybe 15 years, actually. And there was a need for a shift. And the trustees in the transformation from one legal entity to another, that was going to be a kind of symbolic way of flagging that we're having a change now and we need to shift the structure. But it happened under your watch, and it must have, I imagine that was uncomfortable for you to be involved in the redundancy process, but not your fault.
Yeah, but I've got to give credit to everybody that was involved, not just the co-workers, but many of the community members as well. This was done with such grace and with such love and kindness. It could have been very different, and yet people really showed just the very best version of themselves that they could through this process. It is painful when you have to make redundancies in organizations like Findhorn or Esalen, any of these places where they have large live-in communities, because you're not just and I say not just, but you make a redundancy in a corporate world, you make perhaps impacting significantly somebody's income, but it's the job that they go to. Their family is at home. Their community is often elsewhere. Their spiritual connection is elsewhere. Here at Findhorn, it's kind of every level of Maslow's triangle. When you do something like this, of Maslow's pyramid, it's their home, it's their community, it's their spiritual calling, it is their identity, it's their economic stability. And so the level of impact that a decision like this has on the individual in this circumstances, it's immeasurable, I think. And it was handled with so much grace and kindness by the co-workers that I'm still kind of in awe of that. And I think that goes to the strength of a spiritual practice, right? People came here and were co-workers here because they felt called to be here. And I think that is what got us through what otherwise could have been an incredibly, incredibly difficult process. It was difficult. Let's make no bones about that.
So here's a question with two levels to it.
Yeah.
One would be, how would you describe the atmosphere now? And then, are you sniffing at some plants? You got some rainbows on the horizon for us?
Yeah.
What's the atmosphere like at the moment?
It's a moment of quiet. What we're taking the month of October, so we came down to a team of 10. Right now we're at about a team of 10, made up of people who have been at the foundation for a while. So we kept some of that core energy, that core wisdom. This month of October, we're going to try to spend as much time as we can coming together as a group. We meditate together every morning. We're spending more and more time talking about how do we work together in pursuit of what is to come. That's going to continue. We are still having to do some operational things. We're still winding down the buildings, spaces, equipment, those kinds of things, and trying to get our arms around all of that. But I think there is hope. I was in a meeting with the co-workers yesterday, I think, and somebody was talking about, they're excited about what the future could hold for us. I think there is great opportunity for us. The need for what Findhorn provides is greater now than I think it's ever been in many respects. It goes back a little bit to what you talked about. Is it place, or how do we actually embrace a global community? Not just one that is here locally in Findhorn, but how do we reach out? How do we reach back to our origins and reconnect with them in many respects? The core impulse that is so powerful here, the three principles that we're built upon, the sense of community and how you come together, is absolutely a crucial part of what we do. I've heard so many stories, and I went through Experience Week. People might know Findhorn for its Experience Week. It is about how you bring people together. And I was talking to somebody actually earlier today. It's not how they're taught through that process, but it's truly how they experience through that process and how they experience each other as a group. That's one of the richnesses that Findhorn has. And how do we reconnect with some of that work and bring it back into the current context? So I think we're going to look at that into the future, but we're really going to spend some time trying to listen versus deciding what should happen. Right, spirit-led, data-informed is kind of the phrase we're using at the moment to say, well, let's create that quiet moment, as our founder did. To say, let's go within, create the space, listen in the quiet, and see what does come through for us. What are we called to do as an organization?
Data-informed. What kind of data?
Oh, I'm sorry, you broke up there for a moment.
You said spiritual plus data informed. Data informed. What kind of data are you thinking of?
I'm so sorry about that, William. You broke up again.
Okay. You said that the way in which you're contemplating your decision-making process is a mixture of there's meditation, spiritual impulse, plus you'll be data informed.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to what kind of data will inform you.
Yeah. Well, I think we've got to spend a lot of time actually talking to people who want to engage with Findhorn. What does that look like for them? How would they interpret it, to collect that information from them? So it's not just listening to spirit, it's also listening to people who have been a part of Findhorn for decades, people who may have heard about it on the periphery, but have never experienced it, to understand what is meaningful for them and how we can translate what we do into something that is impactful for them. I think we've got to be very aware of the economics, not to necessarily make decisions based just on the economics, because, you know, we can manifest things. It is a question of figuring out what it is we need to do and then finding out ways to do it. But, you know, there is a lot of data that we can use to support how we answer that inner calling.
Let me challenge you on something here then. What I heard you say was that the conversations and the research you're going to do in terms of data is from people who are already engaged in Findhorn, have been engaged. This is what they love about Findhorn. This is how that's all history.
Yeah.
And that history has led to failure.
Mm-hmm.
And my concern would be that a form of nostalgia,
yep,
a form of adherence to a culture that people are familiar with and feel is valuable, but in actual fact has now become global. I can't see how that will inform the future other than say, oh, look, we're just going to let's repeat those same mistakes, or the same. It's out of date.
Yeah. No, I agree with you entirely. I mean, it's Einstein's quote around you that the problems of today can't be solved at the same level of thinking that created them. So, you know, although we are going to reach very much back into our past, we have to find our future as well. And that may be people who have never heard of Findhorn. So how do we find new groups of people to talk to? What is the calling in the world that is that fits the tool set that we have? How do we do that? And part of that data is, for example, data-driven piece is finding new audiences, very diverse conversations, and collecting the input from them around what is the biggest problem that they are facing. Is it fragility? Is it depression? Is it connection or lack of connection to spirit? What is going on for them? And so, you know, if you keep talking to the same audience, as you say, you end up with a shrinking pool because we're all getting older, frankly. And eventually we run out of people. So we're going to spend some time and invest in how do we connect with the new upcoming generations that are seeking the spiritual but not religious, who are seeking the esoteric, and how do we partner with other organizations to do that as well?
Okay, so let me push back again, because I've got a feeling, because I know a lot of the people who are in this meeting actually, and I've got a feeling that what I want to ask you may articulate what they may be thinking and feeling. There are thousands of organizations on the planet who are tuning into what do people need? Where are the pain points? How can we heal the pain points? And that doesn't make Findhorn unique in any way at all. Its ecological push is in no way unique anymore. Its focus on emotional intelligence, literacy, psychotherapy, that's, again, global. What Peter, Eileen, Dorothy, and then David, what they all had in common was an absolute commitment to spiritual development in which the concepts and strategies of esoterics, metaphysics informed what they were doing. So it wasn't just a faith-based exploration. It was one in which the metaphysics was explored, the subtle beings, subtle levels, right? That's what all four of them had in common. And that's a unique offer. And it was that vibe which attracted so many people there at the very beginning. And I heard you say in one meeting with the fellows that you were looking to honor the motivation of the founders. And what I'm not hearing from you or from the discussions is a genuine respect for the fact that Eileen talked to spirit. Peter engaged with psychics. Dorothy engaged with nature spirits and grew the gardens from that. But David was also channeling various beings, right? And there was a conversation about levels of energy, consciousness, expansion. It was a proper mystery school.
Mm-hmm.
There was the discussions about metaphysics were part and parcel of the fabric of the place. And I think a lot of people listening right now will be going, where's that?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think you raise a good question. Where is it today? And that's what I talk about in terms of how do we reach back into our history. I think we've got to really look at that and say, who are we and why are we? And is that how do we find a place for that in the world today? I think part of this reaching back into the history is absolutely critical, because that is what makes us special and unique. As you said, when I was working on the strategy for Esalen, one of the things we did was we engaged in a pretty broad global tour to meet with a lot of centers around the world. When I joined Esalen, I knew nothing about hospitality. I knew nothing about the human potential movement in terms of an educational structure. And so I went out seeking what's everybody else doing in this space. When I landed at Findhorn, there was something different here. It was an intersection of it was an intersection that's focal nexus point was in spirit. Right? And that is the differentiator, is how do we reconnect to that? And how does that come through? You could go to Esalen and it was great for philosophy and psychology and those kinds of things. And you could go to an ashram in India. But people came to Findhorn for a very specific calling. We have to reconnect with that and find out where that source is again, because I think we have lost it to some extent. It is still present, but I think how we enable that into the world is going to be part of our way forward, for certain.
What an interesting puzzle you have to put together, don't you? Really, really interesting. So listen, is the sanctuary going to be rebuilt? What's happening there?
Yes. So the sanctuary rebuild is underway. In fact, it's just outside of my window here. All of the groundwork, I think, was pretty much complete. So the next phase of construction will start early next year, which is very exciting because that's going to bring a lot of energy back into that site. It's on the original site. We're continuing to fundraise for that and support the Park Eco Village Trust, who have kind of taken on the gauntlet of actually doing the construction work for the entire eco village. So hopefully by the end of 2024, the sanctuary will be back and reopen.
And you have moved there, you and your wife, haven't you?
Yes.
Did you actually, I heard you, did you buy a place?
No, not yet.
Yeah.
In fact, this evening, I'm actually coming to you from what was Eileen's home when she was here in Cornerstone, just around the corner from the sanctuary in the Eco Village. And yeah, we've been here for 8 months now.
Yeah, I lived upstairs there for 2 months with Eileen at one point, writing a book.
Oh, wow. Oh, well, you know it well.
Yeah, I do. So you said you had we're moving towards the end of this conversation. You said you had a distinct sense of a calling to be at Findhorn.
Yeah.
How did that come about for you?
Well, I was actually on a large RV trip around the United States kind of 9 months ago, and I'd been in touch with some folks here. Is when we first visited pre-COVID. Had struck up kind of a relationship with Findhorn. Esalen and Findhorn were sister communities founded close to the same time. And Peter had a relationship with Esalen. Esalen had a relationship here. And so I was engaged in some conversations with them. Caroline had said that she was going to step out and take some personal time. And it just landed with me. It was, they were starting the search for a new chief executive. And it was very clear to me, I can't actually explain it other than it was a sense of knowing that despite what we were doing at the time, we needed to be here. And so I put my name in the hat. And we went through a pretty extensive set of conversations and interviews with the community. I think it was a very well done process. And we were planning to come here just for a 2-week visit. And then we were going to go back, and there was going to be a much lengthier process. But we got here, the financial situation that the foundation was in. We were here on the ground for 2 weeks. We flew back to America, moved our RV to somewhere where we could store it. And 2 weeks later, we were home, back here in Scotland. And that's where we've been since. And yeah, so we are completely relocated. This is home. And we're looking forward to it being home for the foreseeable future.
Okay. So listen, here's my last question. I'm very struck by the fact that you have these two facets to yourself. The mechanical model builder that knows how to organize bits and pieces and get them working. And then the other part of you that just comes from your heart. So my question is, from your heart, how do you feel about the whole process now, the whole Findhorn future thing? Are you kind of optimistic, philosophical, passionate? What's going on for you?
A mix of things, if I just sit with that for a moment.
Sure.
I'm very excited and optimistic. I think there's a huge impact that we can have for people in the world to help them reconnect with spirit. It's needed now more than ever. I think we've got an amazing group of people to work with here. We've got an amazing group of supporters around the world. And I'm also noticing that it comes with a great, I take on kind of a weight of responsibility for stewarding this legacy into the future. This is a unique thing in the world that has been created out of the energies of thousands of people over 60 years. And so there is a responsibility to make sure that we do this collectively we do this with a great deal of love and respect. And so I feel a sense of responsibility to that, that history, that legacy. And I have hope, a great deal of hope, for us to be able to play a part in a better version of humanity. I think we are called to do that, and we've got to really look to where can we have the biggest impact in the world in that respect. And I'm looking forward to exploring that with people. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So excited.
It's a very satisfying answer. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think we're bringing this conversation to a close. Everybody, it's obviously watch this space, and energetically, consciousness-wise, prayerfully, hold, Terry, the project in our hearts, patiently, and with love. And let's see what unfolds. Terry, thank you for a really engaging, interesting, enlightening conversation. Thank you for being so transparent. And yeah, it's lots of love to you. Lots of love to you and to the whole of the Findhorn project.
Thank you.
Everybody, that's the end of this dialogue. Come back to us in a few weeks. There'll be another one with Rupert, and then others into the future. But I hope you agree with me that this one has been deep, relevant, hopeful, and calling for us to be patient, open our hearts, and supportive. Lots of love to everybody. And if everybody just waves, that'd be lovely. Either just one big wave to everybody. Yay. Okay, I was going to unmute you all, but the noise would be absolutely awful. Lots of love, everybody. Thank you.